Okay. And if I could ask to come to the stage, Jerry Sheehan of the OECD, Félix Fernández-Shaw of the European Commission, John Giusti of GSMA, and Marko Mišmaš representing BEREC. Great. So welcome and thank you very much. And this panel, this discussion is going to offer a global comparative perspective on the main challenges the digital economy will face over the next 4 years as we race towards 2030. On the stage, we have representatives from multilateral organizations, European institutions, regulators, and the telecommunications industry. Our discussion is going to examine how technological trends are reshaping the public policy frameworks we've heard about this morning, how regulation and international cooperation are now at the forefront of these discussions. We're going to look at the risks of regulatory fragmentation and the challenges we're facing related to infrastructure investment and the need to align economic growth, sustainability, and rights in the context of this transformation and the world we're living in that also entails high global uncertainty. But before we begin, I'm going to give everyone a question right now. I'm going to take 10 seconds, and you cannot use your phone or your device, Felix. This moment, 4 years ago, February 26, 2022, what were you doing? 10 seconds. It was a Saturday, if that hint helps. Okay, let me look at the panel. Does anyone remember? Okay, Felix.
Me ha dicho que no utilice el device, y claro, no. Well, if I remember correctly, we were looking at a war of aggression in Europe 4 years ago.
Yes. So from a geopolitical perspective, we were on day 3 of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And you may recall that someone was saying that that was only going to take 3 days. 4 years later, that aggression is still taking place. Financially, economically, we were experiencing inflation. And technologically, on February 26, 2022, we were still 9 months away from the launch of ChatGPT. An aha moment for all of us as it relates to the power of AI. So as we think about those last 4 years, challenges have increased, risks have become more apparent. And so I'll just start, Jerry, in asking you, in your role at the OECD, what risks are you looking at? Not only those that were there 4 years ago, but those that we're facing now that could hinder the digital economy and the progress that has been made technologically.
Okay, well, very good. Let me first just say thank you for the opportunity to be on this panel. It's one to be here in Spain, one of our member countries, also with an increasing engagement in Latin America. Whether it's through Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, and Mexico, who are our members now, and we've got 3 Latin American countries on the so-called accession path into the OECD, and in Argentina, Brazil, and Peru, and a lot more engagement of OECD work there around the very issues that we're discussing here today, and you'll be discussing throughout the course of the panel. I think what I'd like to do is say about the risks we're facing, maybe think about, put them in the context of what are some of the enablers that we need to pay attention to if we want to get to the 2030 ambitions we have around telecom. And I think in that regard, I'd highlight maybe 3 priorities that we're looking at right now. The first of those being around the resilience and the future-proofing of our networks. The second is around bridging digital divides and access divides in particular. And then the third around issues of interoperability, which I think have been featured so much in the discussion already here today. So let me just say, a word about this notion of resilience and future-proofing, because I think it's time for us, and even more so after the events from 4 years ago and what we've seen over the last several years, for us to start treating digital infrastructure increasingly as critical infrastructure from the perspective of economic security and for competitiveness. And we can see, and you've heard already through the course of the day, in the morning today, that these infrastructures where we have stronger connectivity, stronger broadband connectivity in particular, we see stronger productivity. We see more firm growth, more firm dynamics. We see better public services and others. And as AI continues to emerge and evolve, if we want to see the benefits of AI more uniformly distributed, we're going to make sure that there's fundamental underlying connectivity in all regions of the world. What we have been doing is looking at the growth of broadband connectivity. Since I come from the OECD, I have to share with you some data that we have looking at from 2019 up until 2024, the growth that we've seen in broadband connectivity. So gigabit subscriptions across the OECD region growing more than 6-fold during that time period. If we look at mobile data usage, it nearly tripled in OECD countries, and that includes in our Latin America and Caribbean region colleagues as well. We see that fiber has become the dominant broadband access technology for fixed, right, with now 47% of total fixed broadband connections, and that's almost double where we were back in 2019. So, and we've seen increasing, even though I think in the Latin American and Caribbean region, we see that the connectivity has grown rapidly. It's still lagging, that we see in other OECD countries, but it's also grown at a very, very fast rate. So we heard in the last panel, we need to think about this now in what's coming in the future before 2030 as we think about agentic AI, immersive technologies. I think I heard quantum coming up in the last session as well. These are going to require faster, more dense, more resilient networks. And we've also seen over the course of the last few years what happens when we lose resilience, when we lose that connectivity, the economic consequences, the societal consequences. So we need to, again, make sure that we're thinking of digital infrastructure as part of the critical infrastructures that we build, we protect, we make more resilient, and we can discuss how to do that. If I can say just a word on number 2, around the connectivity divides and making sure that we have connectivity that's widely accessible. Again, we see if we look across countries, we see that the OECD region, right, has connectivity rates that are about 2.5 times those of the global average. Our Latin American OECD countries are somewhere in between the global average and OECD. But what we've also been focusing on recently is the divides that exist within countries, between urban and rural areas. And whether we look at fixed or we looked at mobile connectivity, we see gaps on the order of between 30 and 40% between urban areas and rural areas. Those gaps are even wider when we look in the Latin American countries that we work with. And I think this is something that we need to address through proper regulation, incentives for investment, and others, to make sure that if we want to see economic potential, societal growth, that we're addressing it in all regions within all countries.
John, as we look at 2030 and the great strides that have been made, with infrastructure that's being built out, 5G, becoming more ubiquitous, and as Jerry mentioned, bridging the digital divide that's taking place in rural areas. None of that is done for free. It requires significant investment, much of the time by industry, by operators. So what are, the risks that, the GSMA, the industry players are looking at as we race towards 2030?
No, sure. Thank you so much. And I think you're really right to be diving into the responsibility of all of us to keep an eye on the risk, because 2024, the mobile ecosystem as a whole made up 5.8% of GDP, so very significant already. And by 2030, it has the potential to grow past 8%. So we're talking about a huge portion of the economy that we need to be paying attention to and vigilant with. So I think some of the risk, I mean, there are many. I think the first thing I would really focus on is, I think when we're looking at those countries that will either lead or fall behind in digital, so much of it comes down to the extent to which their policies are focused on enabling scale and the ability to invest. I think we see plenty of places where we've seen amazing progress because of that, whether it be Brazil, the US, China, obviously large countries already, but I think they've understood the importance of scale within their markets, scale within the regions. I think, as someone who lives in Europe, I think when we look at some of these issues here, I'm both worried and encouraged, because I think Europe right now, we look at the fragmentation. 100 operators across the EU 27, you can't possibly compete in terms of investment with that kind of scale. I'm encouraged, of course, that we saw the Draghi and the later reports that highlighted some of these issues. We've seen the von der Leyen and the Commission really take a hold of those. Now we need to see if we can implement those in a way that actually drives, improves scale and strength in Europe. But I think every country can take a lesson on that importance of scale. I think second, I would like to focus on, I think from our sector, of course, we heard the OECD stat about triple the growth in data usage. Well, that is traveling over mobile networks. So 84% of internet connections happen over a mobile device. With that kind of traffic growth happening, you're going to need to make sure you have clarity and certainty in spectrum policy. So I think that's hugely important, that we have a roadmap, that we're anticipating the needs, and that we actually are making sure also that we continue to focus on regional and global harmonization. I think another thing I'm very, very focused on with talking to our members is, of course, we're used to being a regulated industry. We understand very much the link between policy and investment. But we need, as we move forward, we need to stop regulating the markets of a decade ago and focus on what the markets look like today. And of course, we have a broad ecosystem, all of them adding value. The networks, the internet companies, the content providers, the satellite companies are increasingly playing a vital role in reaching some of the underserved communities in partnership with mobile. So I think we need to start looking at what regulation is appropriate in a given case, and be very technology neutral in the way we apply it, and be as light touch as you can be so that you're not creating your own barriers in anticipation of a market failure that may or may not come.
Felix, John says that he is worried and encouraged. Being here, being a citizen of Europe. From your seat at the European Commission, as we think about not just next generation networks, but we've talked this morning a lot about AI, some of the challenges, the opportunities, the risks that are there. How is the Commission looking at these next 4 years and the approach that may be there to potentially, reduce some of John's worries and increase his encouragement, as a citizen of Europe?
Well, thanks a lot. Easy question, difficult answer. But I think you got it right when you said scale. And this is not only about scale in Europe, it's about scale in Latin America and the Caribbean. I don't see the problem we have today in Europe is different from the one we have in Latin America and the Caribbean. If you want to look forward in the next 20 years, you have a scale problem. And it's a scale reply that you need to give, whether it's on regulation, whether it's on innovation, whether it's on supercomputing, whether it's on connectivity, whether it's on protecting vulnerable sectors on the web, like we're trying to do in Europe. This is where I think Europe is trying to go. And it's trying to go at it with a complex 27 jurisdictions in a complex integration process. But this is where we think in Europe that Latin America and the Caribbean should also go. And this is part of the stuff that we're doing together with Latin America, for example, on the supercomputing network, on the EU-LAC cyber shield, on last kilometer satellite connectivity. What we're doing on Iris Square in Europe, we are going to try to extend to other regions. The way in which you supercompute, and you can supercompute, is going to be determinant in the way in which you can participate in developing AI and developing language models and models that you can use at home. All that is to increase sovereignty, which looks like the opposite of reaching scale, because of course it's easy for Brazil, not as easy for Ecuador, maybe difficult for Honduras, certainly impossible for St. Lucia. So how are we going to do this? What we're offering to Latin America and the Caribbean is to go in a more regional scale, like we're doing at home. And that's going to be, I think, the big discussion in our next 10 years is how do you make the scale of innovation and the scale of market compatible with protecting who you are and what you want to be.
Marko, one of the approaches that we've seen from the U.S. perspective is, Chairman Carr has been very much out there with his delete initiative to roll back regulations, to hopefully spur more investment. And one of the reports that we've seen in recent months is that a result of that has been the reduction in monthly prices for consumers and customers. So from your seat as chairman at BEREC, what are the principles that you see should be prioritized, right now, but also as we look to the future to address some of those industry concerns as well that John raised?
Thank you, Jimmy, for the question and also for inviting me on this panel. So first of all, the digital world is indeed moving faster than regulation. But the speed alone should not drive the response. What matters is actually the direction. As we look towards the 2030, the real challenge is not whether we regulate or not, but how we will regulate, because how we will preserve the innovation, ensure competition, incentivize investments, and protect users, all at the same time. And these are the outcomes on the regulatory framework. In fact, the technologies are converging, but the regulation remains structured in silos. This is actually today's reality. If you look on the modern telecom networks, they rely on different things, on the cloud providers, on the AI systems, on the data governance rules, cybersecurity obligations, and so on. And when these frameworks are not aligned, uncertainty increases. So our goal towards the 2030 should be coherence across the legal instrument. So clear allocations of responsibilities and avoidance of duplicative obligations.
So, John, I'm not going to ask you to reflect on, Felix's answer if he's encouraged you more, but, building on what Marko just said about incentivizing, from the industry perspective, what are some of the ways in which regulators can incentivize, the operators, the industry as a whole to achieve these goals that we're talking about?
Well, I mean, firstly, I was encouraged by Felix's comments because I do think that recognition of scale, and also you recognize in the reality that some markets don't inherently on their own have scale. So how can we work together to achieve that? But also very encouraged about the view from BEREC on the importance of certainty, because I think the most important thing is certainty, because investors run away from a lack of clarity. So if you do not know whether you can innovate or do something, you are not going to invest in it. And I think the more that we can really simplify rules and be very clear and let people experiment, but also, I mean, at the core, we all share the goal of protecting consumers. I think sometimes we're anticipating a consumer problem where one may not exist. So I think we need to think and really have the evidence to back up everything we're doing as we as we modernize the regulatory framework, whether it be in Europe or beyond. I think that is I think really very important. I think the other thing is I think we need to stop acting in isolation so much. I think it's very much about partnership. I think, and I saw that the Secretary General of the ITU is here today, because I think there's plenty of areas where governments, industry, and international institutions, OECD, ITU, could be doing more to drive opportunity together. I think a perfect example is, I said 84% of people connect internet via a device, but that means 84% of people who are connecting today. We have to remember there are 3 billion people in the world who are not connecting to the internet today. The biggest barriers are affordability of the device and the digital skills, the ability to use the device. These are perfect areas where government and industry and other players can work together. In fact, the ITU participates with us, with governments, with industry on our Affordable Handset Coalition, because there's a couple of things that we can do together. We can really work at what are the requirements for an attractive device for the base of the pyramid. We know one of the biggest factors in at least a third or more of the cost is usually taxation. If you want more people connected, there is a very simple answer to that question. I think also governments run schools. If we want to increase skills, let's start at those sort of foundational levels. So I think really that partnership would be another area to encourage investment. And I think also, I don't want to lose focus as we move forward on how we got to where we are today, which is common standards, which very much was led and driven by Europe from the beginning, the GSMA MOU, which of course led to the creation of GSMA, which of course led to the fantastic event in Barcelona next week, which shows that common standards and the scale and the cost savings that come from that are something that also encourage investment. So there's so many different factors coming together. I think we're in a great position. We just cannot take it for granted, and we need to not just rest on the past. We need to be looking to the future.
Felix, how do we not take that for granted? How, you mentioned, the EU Commission, the work that you're doing in the Caribbean and Latin America. How can we continue to encourage this international cooperation where right now there is, some efforts that are out there and folks are in many ways rightly sometimes focusing on how do I get what's right at home fixed first before then going out and reinforcing this international cooperation that we've had for years. How is the EU, continuing to do that, and how do you look into the future to keep it going?
Well, one of the main risks of going into international cooperation is everyone quickly wants to speak about the easy part. Don't get me wrong, the easy part is the big policy discussion, the big principles. We all agree on the big principles. How they land, that becomes complicated. So in our dialogue with Latin America and the Caribbean, we've put together two ways of walking. One is the Digital Alliance that has been now moving forward, where the idea in artificial intelligence, cyber, digital governance, data governance, connectivity is not to talk about policy. It's rather to try and build projects together. Projects like the supercomputing network, satellite connectivity, cyber shields, mutual recognition of digital identities, electronic signatures. These kind of issues are the ones that, first of all, are close to the citizens, and second of all, they bring you together not over big principles, but over real stuff that forces everyone to align. And that is a very bad word, but a very usual European Commission word. Yeah, why are you laughing? The issue here is if you want to access the European market and you want to have a European compatible digital identity, you need a certain amount of standards. If you want to, and that's what we're doing with Mercosur, for example. We're working on alignment to be able to recognize digital identity and e-signatures. If you want to work on cyber protection, we need scale. We can very happily in Europe, we are trying to build our own cyber capacity. We're very happy, and we've offered Latin America and the Caribbean to join in. But of course, if you want to join in my cyber capacity, you need to have a certain level. We are ready to help through the Global Gateway. As many of you here know, we've generated an investment hub for companies and for governments to bring standards up. Because if you want to go collective and go scale, a certain moment you're going to have systems that speak to each other and that align with each other. Otherwise, it just won't work. Same thing we're doing with supercomputing. You cannot have a supercomputer in every city in Europe and in Latin America. You have to mutualize. And if you mutualize, you need to align. That is a fact of life. But better to mutualize on your own terms than to mutualize on somebody else's terms. And that's what we're trying to do with Latin America and the Caribbean, let alone the complexities of scale in the Caribbean. What we're trying to do is to explain, this is what we do for ourselves, this is how we do it, this is what is needed to do it, come on in.
Jerry, the OECD has been a leader in driving international cooperation. The work that's ongoing now and similar to what's planned out, how will you navigate, these challenges and opportunities that are presenting themselves?
Thank you. Well, I think we're trying to navigate the opportunities very much as we see, I think from our perspective, this kind of international collaboration around digital infrastructures is no real longer optional. I mean, it's really fundamental to making progress in these areas. And I'd say we have probably 5 different ways in which we're trying to advance on that work. Some is what I was quoting earlier today, right? It's coming up with the internationally comparable statistics so that countries can measure themselves and regions can measure themselves against others, whether it's in broadband connectivity, it's in pricing and bundle pricing and so forth across countries. We have our Going Digital Toolkit that takes a whole framework for countries to see how well they're progressing on the broader digital transformation, and all of that work continues to proceed. I think also, I will say we do a lot of work on high-level principles, which are a lot harder to achieve than you might expect. But at the same time, I think what we're also finding is that providing a forum for multinational dialogue, as all countries and all regions are struggling with the same challenges now. The integration of terrestrial and satellite networks, right? The increasing complexity as data centers and others become part of the digital infrastructure. How do we adapt and adopt regulatory frameworks to do it? And so by providing a multinational forum for exchanging and identifying on good practice, we hope that we can advance those practices as well. I'd say the third level is the multi-stakeholder engagement. So yes, in our committees and our working parties, we bring government officials together and regulators together. We've also gone out of our way to make sure that industry has a seat at the table, often through our business at OECD representation, also through workshops and other engagements where we get a business perspective, because we need to make sure that the policy recommendations we put out are practical and can be fit into good practice. I would say that maybe the 2 others, I think we do some interesting analytical work that informs policy making. So on these issues of the relationship between scale and investment and competition, we're in fact doing collaborative work now between my units in science, tech, and innovation and our competition policy committee, right, to shed light on how do these factors play out in the current environment and into the future. And then I'll say finally, we try to take the good practices that we've identified and help countries apply them. So we've got a number of ongoing and planned country-level reviews of telecommunications policy, one that we'll be finishing up very soon in Colombia, one that we're just getting underway now in Brazil. And this is a good way to take good practice that we develop through our multilateral fora and put them into practice in countries, going beyond the principles and getting down into more the nuts and bolts of how to make things happen on the ground.
So lots of work going, as we've said from the beginning, from multilateral to industry associations to regulators. As we wrap up, we talked about where we were 4 years ago. So take a quick look into your crystal balls and a quick answer here. Where do you see us all collectively on February 26, 2030? Hopefully back here in Madrid with Karim, but in a larger perspective, where do you see us? Marko, I'll start with you.
If I look from a regulatory perspective, by 2030, the question will not be how many rules we will have, but if they will work together. So AI, connectivity, clouds, data, all those things are already today deeply interconnected. It will be tomorrow even more. So our regulatory approach must reflect that reality. So the future requires coordination across different domains, not the silos that unintentionally slow the innovation. This is my view.
Felix, where do you see us in 2030?
Well, Madrid is a good place, but I would hope that Europe and Latin America and the Caribbean in 2030 can start boasting about having done and having built a number of joint issues, projects, ways of working, ways of tackling challenges together, not only from the political level, which is, as I said, not in the bilateral relationship, but rather on actual things, developing actual links on how to do AI, how to supercompute, on connectivity, on 5G, on cyber. These are the things that I really would like to see us landing on.
Jerry.
Yeah, so I think we'll be back here, but we will have seen each other so many times in between because we're going to continue to need this kind of dialogue to advance on the issues that we're addressing now. I think in 4 years, we're going to be moving on to whatever the next thing is, and I can't tell you what it is beyond agentic AI and quantum computing, right? This is a field that's going to continue to develop and continue to evolve. We always say the technology is evolving at an increasing speed. We need to be much more anticipatory and try, and this is where we need the engagement from the business community and others. What is coming next so that we can start working on it sooner? So I hope in 4 years we've made progress on whatever the next thing is that we're going to be talking about for 2040.
And John, as we build towards your little event next week in Barcelona in 2030 as well, you know, where do you see us on February 26, 2030?
Well, yes, again, on our way to Barcelona. If it happens to involve a stop here, fantastic. But I think where we are in 2030, I mean, we're going to see on the floors of Barcelona, not just networks, but all the different sectors of the economy to come together and leveraging digital. Where it's going to take us exactly, where AI is going to get us by 2030, it's hard to say, but my greatest hope is that all of these benefits are actually reaped by more and more percentage of the population. I think as we look at AI in particular, one of my worries, but also I'm very encouraged because there are people here working on this challenge now, is the issue of language. Most AI models today are trained in English or Chinese. What about the people in Africa who speak Swahili? What about Spanish, which I know is also a large language, but not to the scale of the Chinese or the English models. So I think, and this is where the point of mutualization comes in, we can't all be building our own models. We need to be working together. We need to be looking at opportunities so that everyone can reap the benefits of AI and the next innovations to come.
And the word you use there is hope. You know, I think that we look at these challenges, we look at these risks that are there, but the rapid and continued change and evolution of the technology, it does have underlying some hope that's in there. And so hopefully what we carry with us throughout the discussions today, tomorrow, into next week, and over the next 4 years, allow us to recognize the positive opportunities that are there and overcome these challenges and risks. So please join me in giving a round of applause for our panelists for the insightful.